Well, hello, honey. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I mean, often I feel like this show is a vessel for, like I said earlier, the right message, getting to the right person at the right time. And I certainly feel that way with you for the mere fact that we met in person months ago. Just amazingly so. We were there for hockey and we were texting back and forth. And you said, "Well, where are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, Westchester." And you're like, "That's where we're headquartered." And so that to me was a clear sign that we needed to get together and do the show and have you on. So, again, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your message with my audience.
Oh, I love it. Anytime that I get a chance to share like what's helped us along our journey and all the work that we're doing right now, I just appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So, to kind of give our audience a bird's eye view of your story, who may not already know, can you take us through the key events in your life that led you to the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, so I was really thrilled to be a stay-at-home mom. I was excited to, hit the ground running and raise a big family. And at the time, I was living in Atlanta with my husband, and we had my daughter. And then, 21 months later, we had these twins. And so we were on this like, I'm one of six, he's one of four. We were both interested in having a large family. And then my boys kept getting sick, which I found a little bit odd because I was a stay-at-home mom. I breastfed my twins for 60 months. I made my own baby food. I was all organic. I'm originally from Vermont and I grew up on an organic goat farm. So I like kind of had the mindset, I think that, train them well and they will not part. I went right back to kind of how my mom raised me. And it was just really bizarre that my kids kept getting sick continually. My twins, not my daughter, but my twins. And I just really couldn't figure it out. Like we didn't even have family. We weren't like going a ton of places. And so fast forward to when they were just shy of 18 months, at 17 months, and they had a really significant reaction to their vaccines to the point that they kind of showed us that they had had a reaction each time, but it wasn't significant enough. And I thought they were picking something up at the doctor's office. And I'd call and I'd be like, hey, they're sick again. And they were like, oh, they probably picked something up here. Just give them Tylenol, watch them close, hydrate them. And then we realized like they were getting sick and then they were getting better and sick and then getting better. But at 17 months, they stopped getting better.
Mm.
And my whole life kind of changed at that time. My husband and I were actually on a work trip in Atlantis, and we, brought one of our really good babysitters with our daughter, and we were excited to like get away. It was the first time I left the twins, and I remember our joke is that it was the largest phone bill I'd ever had because I was sneaking in the bathroom calling my friend who was watching my twins going, are they okay? I mean, something's not right. And it
Mm.
was funny because my husband's like, you spent like $800 on a phone call. I'm like, there's something not right here. And it just coincides with what, our records showed. And my boys had a significant reaction to the vaccines. And what we later found out is they had an underlying mitodysfunction. And like too many too soon were the culprit, right? So I've been tested, my daughter's been tested. We all had the same underlying issues. However, weren't giving as many at once. And so that's where my life kind of derailed. And so what I realized was like a medical injury shifted my kids into this really crazy, fragile state. They were diagnosed with autism, they were diagnosed with mitochondrial disorder, they were diagnosed with like, reflux and, asthma and, allergies and eczema. And it was just like everything just hit. And I was like, okay, something triggered this. They
Mm.
were born perfectly healthy. How do I fix it? And that's what kind of set me on the path of, if something hurt this, we can heal it, right? And so that was kind of my mindset. And I hit the ground running and I had an occupational therapy appointment with my son, and my son fell and he hit his lip, and the therapist was like, "Ooh, you should get that looked at." And I said, "Oh, he's just a tough Italian kid." She goes, "No. That's an opioid effect from gluten, and the fact that he was like numb to the pain shows that there's something wrong with his receptors." And I was like, "Wait, what? Like I'm just a mom? Like what are you saying here?" And so she actually put me on the path, sent me to this doctor that was an integrative, more natural physician, and said, let's run some panels, let's do some tests. And they were like, oh, yeah, you can see why they had this injury. We can probably work on fixing this, and this. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I thought. So it kind of put me on the right path that like it was a three-pronged stool, I always say. Like the medical component was critically as important as like the healthy home environment, but also the therapies, right? So you
Mhm.
needed like the three-pronged stool or else one side would collapse. So while we were doing all those therapies, we were supporting them medically alongside all of it. And I feel like that showed me, I started seeing right away, like my one son, I took him off of gluten and dairy. At this point, they'd been diagnosed with autism and it was suggested by this doctor. And my one son, Victor, like his language like came right back.
Wow.
And when we took him off of dairy, all the ear infections stopped, the croup stopped, like the asthmatic attacks, like we stopped needing the nebulizer. And that was a great thing for my son Victor, who was really more medically complex. And then my other twin Vincent, he was a little more alert, but he was still like really withdrawn. And I think that's where my husband and I were like, we have to rethink everything that we've done. And my husband worked for an organization in Pennsylvania at the time we were living in Atlanta. And his company was like, well, if you ever want to move, we'd love to move you to the headquarters. And I started looking up resources. I started looking up schools. And by the grace of God, Pennsylvania is one of the top 5 in the country for services for autism. And we realized having two, we needed to walk away from the dream house we had just built to raise like a large family and our grandkids. And feel like it was a test from God saying, how much do you want that house you built from scratch to retire in, and how much do you want to help those kids? And we walked away, never looked back, and it was probably the best thing to ever happen. Now, upon moving to Pennsylvania, though, I had a really hard time finding like-minded physicians and parents, and that was the challenge for me. And that's where I kind of went into okay, if my kids are getting better and these people don't know this, I need to get loud. And that's what
Mm.
kind of started me on the path of like advocacy and parent support and spreading this knowledge that our kids can heal.
Wow. What an incredible drive. What kept you moving forward when things were so unknown, where you were literally doing all this investigative work by yourself, essentially? What kept you going?
I think, the smartest thing I did was start going to conferences. And I remember surrounding myself with really strong parents that you could tell their heart was just to help their child, right? I always say there were like two camps. There was like the camp of the parents that were like, oh my gosh, my child, I'm so sad and I'm depressed. And they want to go in the corner and cry, and everybody is entitled to that opinion. But then I was like, I have one chance to raise this child, one chance to help their body and their brain develop, and this is a critical lifeline, right? And so there's the other camp that was like, what can we do to help them reach their full potential? And right away, I was like, those are my people, right? So I'm not going to go sit and cry. My husband was a little bit more in the crying camp. He was just so sad that our boys were totally fine. And we had a confirmed vaccine injury. So it wasn't like
Mm.
we thought this was possible. We were told, and they were given an exemption, and we were told they could never have any more inoculations. And I think for him, I can understand why people go there, right? Because I lived with him and he was like, this is horrible. Like something intending to help them and heal them destroyed them. How could this happen to my husband's Italian, my twins are Victor and Vincent? Like it's his legacy, it's his name.
Yeah.
And I was like, it doesn't matter. We can't cry over spilled milk. We just got to move on. Like so we kind of in our own ways went into the different camps. And he just wanted me home and to like love on us. And I was like, no, no, no. I got to be with these people because they're going to keep me up. They're going to keep me strong. I'm going to learn from them. They're going to learn from me and we're going to make a difference. So, I feel like my motivation primarily was when they were like 2.5, I started going to some serious conferences and I never stopped. Then I started.
And right. Well, and that has brought you into being the executive director of MedMaps. Can you talk a little bit about that organization and what its core philosophy is? Because I think for many people, I had never heard of it, and I feel like I'm pretty well versed in the health
Yeah.
and wellness world. And it was incredible, the speakers that were coming on and what they're doing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so with that journey, I started doing like parent events and parent conferences. I used to host like the National Autism Conference, and I started really working with a lot of these physicians to figure out how we can help all these kids, right? It's not like we're trying to cure autism, but we're curing whatever ailment might be like adding to the autism, right? So if a kid's in chronic pain, then we want to remove that pain so they're not screaming 24/7. You don't know if that's a sensory issue, a pain issue, a lack of communication issue. So I figured out really quickly what doctors were really, really powerful. And I started throwing conferences for families. And in 2022, after COVID shut down, we had a national autism conference, and the the gentleman who was the president of the MAPS organization was like, I really need you to take this to the next level. So MAPS was an organization that started about 15 years ago, and it was like this tiny little elite box. And I always tell people it's like the TV show House, if you'd ever seen it. It's like these elite specialists that could figure out anything that was so complex, and they could get to the root cause, and they could discern how to move forward. And when MAPS started, it was just MDs, and it was like the creme de la creme, right? It was like the elite. And it was really hard to find doctors like this. And then there was I started helping them at their inception because I was familiar with throwing conferences for families and parents, and I worked with the doctors. So I was like, I'll volunteer. That kept me in the game. I'll volunteer and I'll do anything you want. Just let me hear that content. Let me know how to use it for my families that I'm helping. And I think that, you know, I saw that they wanted to be the specialist component. But then after COVID happened, there was a shift and a different president took over, Dr. James Newen-Schwander. He goes by Dr. New. And he was like, I need you because we need to break down these doors and we need to get more doctors. We need more healthcare practitioners. We need naturopaths. We need, you know, chiropractors. We need nurse practitioners. We need occupational therapists, like first line of defense, nurses, everybody who's involved with these complex kids, not just autism, Down syndrome, asthma, ADHD, whatever it is. We need these physicians to know what they're looking at when it walks in the door and how they could potentially dig deeper to root cause to help them survive in life a little bit better, right? So he asked me to come along and break down those barriers and those, like, the elite, I guess, stigmatism that MAPS had had on it. And MAPS is the only organization in the country that has a CME fellowship that trains practitioners how to identify and treat the root cause for complex medical cases for pediatrics, infancy through adulthood. And so, it is critical. It should kind of become the standard of care because I feel like if everybody was MAPS trained, our kids wouldn't have to suffer for years and years trying to figure out what's triggering, their eoencephalititis or their asthma or their ADD. If it might be like three underlying things that we could just turn off or turn on or help support, and they could have a much easier life. That should be every child. Like, so
Yeah.
I was totally on board with everything he was saying. And I'm like, I was ready to retire after 20 years of helping parents, and because I'm getting older and my kids were like, my twins at this point were like 20 years old. And I'm like, I got to do this. Like this, we have to get louder. We have to, like, we can really shape the community. So I feel like you people, like you saying you never heard of it. And where was this? It just had been there. It just
Yeah.
was like a little secret, right? So that's why I'm so thankful for people like you bringing us on to help us get louder, because we really can change the trajectory of all children with this content. I mean, all children can benefit from, healthier living lifestyles, what might be impacting them from the environment, from inside their house, from outside their house, from their school, from their food, from their diet. So, you know, MAPS is really truly the elite when it comes to the standard of care for all things pediatrics. They stopped just doing autism, like in 2021, they really started shifting that focus. It's all things, right?
Mm.
That's where I feel like we've gotten really, really powerful and we're growing. Like, I think we had a 340% increase in our attendance,
Wow.
membership growth. But it was really because we just opened up the doors and we let people know we existed. And then people are like coming to our conference going, this has been here for 14 years. How did I not know about this?
Yeah.
And that's where, New kind of hired me to, because I'm like the biggest cheerleader for healing children and helping them all reach their full potential, no matter where they are. I'm all about accepting our children, but nobody ever wants to celebrate anything hindering them, right? So I feel like, the job was kind of made for me because I'm just so thrilled that I am in this position watching kids get better day in and day out.
Have you faced any kind of backlash from the expansion of MAPS? Because I feel like if it was sequestered for so long, besides just being this like elite group, have you faced anything that's any kind of pushback from the work that you're doing, from the information that's getting out? Because I feel like in a lot of ways it's kind of revolutionary, addressing these core issues where before you would just put a band-aid on it with pharmaceuticals.
Right, right. So the only backlash we tend to get is people often think, I do have a personal story. I have twins that had a confirmed vaccine injury. So, right, I can't deny what happened to my children. Now, it's not everybody's story. I mean, we've just learned recently, one of our researchers, one of our physicians, his name's William Parker. He was at Duke for 28 years and he did a lot of the acetaminophen research. And he has documentation showing that just acetaminophen can be correlated to autism. I mean, you put both together and our kids can be really injured, but so it's not everybody's story. But I feel like that a lot of people are like, oh, they talk about vaccines. They're like, the anti, establishment people or whatever. But when the people actually come to our conference, they are blown away. We have a lot of people that come from the AAP and they are like, wow, it's all actually scientific, research based. And we don't typically talk about anything to do with vaccines on
Mm.
the stage, right? So, unless there's something, we did just have our first CME presentation at our last conference, weighing the pros and cons of when you have to be more careful with them. And that was actually really well received because, in my case, when my boys had the reaction, we went to the top mitoneurologist in the country, and he was in Atlanta, Children's South of Atlanta, and he had said to us, clear as day, your kids should have never gotten these vaccines. It was too many too soon. And I was like, well, shouldn't somebody know that? Like, shouldn't the doctors have known? Like, shouldn't there be red flags? And he was like, oh yeah, you could have checked this and this and this. And they would have all been cues that you might wanted to hold off. And so I had a pediatrician in Atlanta who was amazing. He taught pediatrics at Emory. He himself had a child in the spectrum. So when I went to him, my boys were born in 2000, when the CDC said, let's remove thimerosal from vaccines. I had gone to him and said, I'm a little nervous. My boys are like twins. They're boys, they're preemies. They're all like, they're a little more delicate. Should we be careful here? And he goes, well, I think we should spread them out. So here's the thing. These pediatricians are doing the best that they can with the knowledge that they have. They don't have the right tools. He had no idea he could check like a lactic purpuric acid to see if my kid's mito was not working strong enough to process things. He was like, let's try spreading them out every 2 weeks. We were trying the best that we could with the tools that we had. I would never blame my pediatrician
Mm.
ever. But what I do blame is, society not getting behind like what's happening to kids like Honey's kids and what can we learn from them to help the next generation, right? My kids are 24. I mean 25. I'm so sorry. They just turned 25. They were injured like 20, 3 years ago. Like nobody's calling me to say, what did you do and how can we learn from you, right? To prevent this.
Mhm.
And I think there's a critical thing I should share, and I don't really get loud with this, but I think I should. I was on the Today Show because my kids have the confirmed injury, and I was on the Today Show with the president of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And when we were in the green room, my husband said to him, listen, they were twins, boys, and preemies. Why would they be allowed to be inoculated as if they were on target with, being born when they weren't even supposed to be out of the womb? And he was like, they were predestined to have a reaction to these vaccines. And, my husband said, they're going to have reactions. And he said, and this was really powerful for me to hear, and it's never left me. And my husband, I thought it just broke him. But he said, we know there's a small population of children that are going to be injured by vaccines. But for the masses, it protects the most. And we have to look out for the masses. And I was like, well, that's okay until it's your kid. And what are we doing to protect that small population? Because it might be bigger than we think.
Mhm.
So that's where, he was like, and this is important to share because I think some back history is critical to understand like the why with this. So the American Academy of Pediatrics sets up the guideline on how to vaccinate. And they're not responsible for the testing and the safety of the vaccines. That's the CDC's job. So after I had left him, he had told me, he goes, it's not our job to make sure they're safe. It's our job to make sure the kids get them all, right? It's the CDC's job to make sure they're safe. So I went and asked the CDC, how come you're allowing the AAP to give like four of these at one time? Like I was told if I had vaccinated my kids, like I was vaccinated and I was born in 73, I'm 52 now. So if they were vaccinated like I was, my kids wouldn't have had any of these issues. But we, have the vaccine schedule has like ballooned and now they're getting like 48 things versus like four things. And so many, again, my kids were told too many too soon. And the CDC was like, we have never told the AAP to give that many at one time. And we have never told them they could give three at one time. We tell them which each one is safe.
Wow.
And I was like, wait, what? So it's almost like two ships missing in the wind. And so that's where I love our doctors are like, okay, what happened to kids like Honey, right? The MAPS doctors are all about like, they're like the house doctors. I hate referencing that, but it's the only show that I can reference that, he just digs deeper until he finds out what's the root, what's causing this, and what can we do to prevent it. So, I feel like these MAPS doctors, our medical board, they're absolutely our heroes. It's a nonprofit. They all volunteer their time and they are trying to learn from kids like ours. They are trying to put up case studies like here are two kids like Honey's and we did X, Y, and Z and they got better and they lost their diagnosis. So
Yeah.
you can fix so many issues. And so I feel like, you know, I pray, my prayer is that it becomes the standard of care, and all those in this realm of pediatrics will be forced to attend even just one MAPS training. We have a foundational course, and that foundation course can teach them tips, tangible pearls that they can utilize immediately to help every kid that walks in their door. To maybe
Mm,
recognize, hey, they might be a little more delicate. They have a family history of autoimmune issues. And, the kid was a little weak because he was born as a preemie. And, you know, those seeds are planted at our conferences. So it's critical, I think, to get louder with that and bring in more from the medical community to learn from us.
absolutely. And all the countless hours that you've sat in and listened to these speakers and all this amazing information that's gone out, what would you say is the biggest hinge to swing the biggest door? What tangible things, like you said, these pearls, can these doctors think about? Can these parents who are tuning into this start implementing to improve their child's life, whether their child has autism or not? Maybe it's dyslexia, maybe it's something else.
So, I think there's two parts to that. So, what can the physicians right off the bat will come away knowing that you have to clean up the environment. You have to do like a really thorough history of what the parents are facing, what are their siblings facing? Do you have any other issues? What's going on that we should possibly shift, right? To maybe not go down the path that is one size fits all and maybe look at more individualized components with some of these pearls, like with the diet. If a child is having chronic eczema, are we looking at taking them off of dairy? So those are the kinds of things that we are talking about right away in our foundations courses. Those kinds of pearls, like if a child is bedwetting at night, that could potentially be a seizure. Like there's a lot of
Mhm.
neurological issues. Like these are things that I think right off the bat, they can look at the diet, they can look at the environment, they can look at the history of the family. So I think that is the most critical thing that these doctors can learn to shift right away. But that's part one. Part two, the issue sometimes lies in this truth. A lot of these physicians will come to our conference and they are like deer in headlights and they're mortified. And we've had several at our last conference. I actually remember one of the doctors, wonderful pediatrician. She was incredible. She heard about us. She was like, oh, I have all these kids that are chronically ill in my practice. I want to learn from you guys. She was crying on Sunday because she felt so overwhelmed. She's like, I have 10 to 15 minutes to see these patients. How do
Mhm.
I get their well visits? How do I, get all their records? How do I get everything lined up? And then how do I start shifting and finding out more? And, so I think that's part of the issue, right? Is that these doctors, a lot of them don't take insurance. because they want to spend like an
Mm,
hour. And I personally go to somebody that doesn't take insurance because I need them to fully dive into what's going on with my child. So we are working with some people in legislation on getting stronger policies in place where insurance, if you had like a diagnosis of like an illness or like an asthma, that we would start allowing more time, right? So if you have the diagnosis of autism or ADHD or eczema or dyslexia, that shouldn't just be a typical well visit. It
yeah.
needs like 3 times the amount of time allocated for that, in my opinion. So we are working with some people in legislation right now to get that passed because sometimes their hands are just tied.
Yeah.
They don't even have a chance to talk about if they need the clinical pearls that they might have learned, right? So it's really like a two-part, like they need the tangible tools and they can take them and they can help right off the bat, but they need a little bit more time to be able to discuss what the parents are seeing because the parents are the good, baseline and they're the reflection of what the child's having issues with. So they need that information to be able to even implement anything.
Right. Where do you think we are on the timeline of treating autism and all of these, immune conditions? Are you hopeful? Are we close to a breakthrough?
I think we're like, oh my gosh, I feel like everything I've ever done for the past 20 years, um, it was all for right now. I think right now, um, I had learned about Robert Kennedy Jr. Ironically, I was living in Atlanta when my twins were born, and I started following him in 2000 because he was an environmental lawyer. He was really big on, like health and safety of like environmental exposures. I grew up in Vermont. You know, there was a lot of organic farming. Like that was kind of my mindset. I breastfed for like 16 months. I was one of the weird ones that didn't circumcise my twins 25 years ago. Like I think it's people know now that you don't have to, but at the time, somebody just said, "Hey, you might want to look into that. You might want to research. You might not need to do that." And so I feel like that I was like an open-minded, what do I need to do to help my child, right? And so I had followed him for a very long time. And so now that he is in our current administration, I am thrilled because I know from my 20 years of watching what he's been doing that he gets this. Like he really gets this. So I feel like we are absolutely getting ready to flip the script. We are absolutely going to start making kids healthy again. We are absolutely ready to equip physicians on how to change the trajectory, and our kids are not going to keep getting sicker and sicker and sicker. We're going to get them better and better and better. And I feel that in every ounce of my fiber, my being, and my existence, that this right now is when we're going to be heard. And, my prayer is that people, they don't shoot the messenger, but they really truly listen to the message because it is about making America healthy again. And we know that we can. We absolutely can. And there's so much research and there's so much coming out and it's continually coming out that, I worked in parent support and for those 14 years, I had two of my partners, their kids lost their diagnosis of autism. Like
Mm,
I've seen this happen. Now I didn't win the lottery, right? But I have my one son. He was a Make-A-Wish kid, and he's still alive thanks to my doctor's, wisdom, my MAPS doctor. And I have another son who didn't learn to communicate until he was 18, but he's now in this movement for spellers and
yeah,
communicate. He's going to college, and he recently spoke for Harvard University on incorporating typers into higher level education. So I feel like everything is starting to come to a head. There's so much hope for these kids. And I have two case studies that are N of one in my own household to see that truth, but I'm also surrounded by my friends that have had incredible changes. And it's just getting bigger and better and we're reaching more and we're helping even more and more and more. So
I love that. And we have to touch on spellers. I just watched the documentary again this past week in preparation for this interview, and there's a moment where JD, he's in there, and he says, "Not only did you save his son Jamie, but you saved the entire family." What was that moment like for you?
so I start like tearing up now, even hearing that. That was a really powerful film. So, we we have done all of this, and JB and I have seen the same MAPS position, and we've done all of this, like, root cause biomedical healing, and we got our kids to a place where we were like, they're amazing. There's nothing else that we really can fix, right? We internally fixed everything, and we felt like our kids were great, but we couldn't get the language. And that is one of the biggest issues with autism. And that's usually your baseline. And I'll share, my son was just asked to write an article and be on the cover of an autism or a special needs magazine. And he wrote, he chose what he wrote with his friend, and he wrote A Tale of Two Twins. And so he talked about how when you're first diagnosed, how, when you get the language, you're put into this high functioning box. And when you don't get the language, you're put into this low functioning box. And he was talking about himself and his brother. And, here I thought my success story was my son Victor, when really my success story was my son Vincent, who was the non-speaker who had nothing left to like treat or help except for his language. So at 18, when I found this modality to access language from a gross motor part of the brain versus the fine motor, I was like, oh my gosh, it all worked. All these parents that are like, I've done that, the diet didn't do anything. I've done that, it did nothing. I've done this, it didn't help. Well, guess what? It might have, and you just didn't know, right? So that's where testing comes in. And, we knew that we fixed a lot of inflammation in Vincent. We got his body healthy. He was doing great. And when I implemented spellers, oh my gosh, he just ran. He ran. And within a few short weeks, he was saying words that I had to go get a dictionary to look up. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's totally in there. They're all in there. We were all
Mm.
wrong about this. So that's when I started calling a few friends, and had it, I called it a God tab. Like, I don't get God winks, I get like a push. You have to do this. And so I knew I had to call JB and say, listen, I knew he was in a similar boat, because when your kid turns 18 or 21, it's a very dark day, because there's nothing, you're losing services, you lose your community, you lose your house, you lose everything for these kids. You're like, your school, your brick and mortars, like everything that supported them is it's just gone. And so JB's son, was in a similar situation as us, and he's a few years younger. And so I knew he was in a rough place. So I kept getting this drive to call him and tell him about what we had found. And he wasn't very kind to me when I did, because he was like, screw you, don't tell me who my kid is, kind of thing. But and what I had to make really crystal clear was, JB, this isn't about what we know of our children. This is about what society misguided us in, because
Mm.
we all thought that the language was the ultimate goal. It's not. It's now we can access this language. We can give them a different way to get it out. And it's like Stephen Hawkins. The guy is
Mhm.
brilliant. Just because he's in a wheelchair doesn't mean that his brain isn't 100% intact. And so that's where, I told JB the story and about my son. He went home, he sent me a video and was like, my kid cannot do that. This is my son. And that's when I started crying, and I was like, oh yeah, he can do it. I could tell he was regulated. He was in there. He was compliant. He was following the directions. He was playing light bright with his aide. It was just, I knew right then it was gonna change his world. And I was just so happy to somebody that poured their heart and soul into helping this community. I was gonna be able to help him. And so JB went out on a mission to prove me wrong, and he ended up proving me right. Wrote the book Underestimated, and then after he wrote the Underestimated book, everybody said, oh, it's just Honey's kid, and it's just JB's kid. And it wasn't just Jamie and Vincent. He and I knew it was all of these kids. We were just misguided. And so he made a movie to prove they're all in there. We were just told wrong. And that movie, it was shown on the High Wire with Del Bigtree, and in 2 weeks it had 14 million views. It was their most watched show they'd ever had in their history. And it's still going. I mean, just to see the ripple on the pond effect and all these
Mhm.
kids. And, I have friends that their kids are like 35, and they are just now learning to spell and communicate and learn who their children are internally.
Mm.
Like, it's just so powerful and moving. And oh my gosh, you want to talk about hope? Like, the hope of being able to have my son dictate what he wants in his life. He wanted to
Mhm.
go to college. Like, we were going to sign him up for he was going to take his GED, and we were going to, just take the courses. And he's like, I really think I'd like to go back to school and learn what I missed, because they just taught me to like stack blocks and social skills. And I never really learned any of the content aside from what I learned from you guys or watching TV. And so Vincent dictated that he wanted to go back and learn high school. And he did high school in 18 months online, and he got to pick and choose, and he realized what he loved and what he didn't love. And that helped to guide where he wanted to be in college. So, now, he just got invited to be part of an amazing fraternity, and he has his induction tomorrow night. It's like almost like if you would have told me that my
Mm.
severely autistic, non-speaking son with autism like would have been going to college, living the life that he's living, dictating what he wants to eat, who he wants to hang with, what he wants to do as far as his education. Never, never would I have believed you. And it's the same with JB, right? No, nobody told us that this is possible, but it's absolutely possible. And now all these kids are like leading the path, and now all those coming behind us, we're working to get this in schools, and we're working to get this modality recognized. When deaf people were first, when they were first ideally identified as being mentally challenged because of
Right,
the way in which they spoke, right? And then they realized, oh, it's just how they speak. They're not mentally impaired at all. It's just their language comes out differently. This is no different.
right.
Every non-speaking individual in the United States and the world, globally, everywhere, they are all intact. There are some children, I believe, that have like a mental impairment from other issues, but it's not the autism holding them back, and it's not the nonverbal. It's the apraxia that's just preventing their brain from communicating through their mouth. So now we have a way that we can get them communicating, and I just think it's the most beautiful thing ever. It's like
I
the
do too.
craziest, most happiest ending to a story that we all thought was a gloom and doom.
Mm. I mean, that's one of the biggest things I learned from the documentary. I had no idea that the language and cognition were completely separate parts of the brain, and that through this simple letterboard that they can use their, hands and a pencil, they can communicate and completely change their lives and their families' lives. So well done. Beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, and right, and even now, like, people need to understand it's really slow, and you have to figure out how to do this slowly, like you just said with a letterboard. But
Hmm.
there's like a hierarchy, right? We can keep climbing up that. So Vincent is like kind of like the lead of the pack, if you will, at one of the highest, most advanced spellers. And so he works every Tuesday and Thursday. He does consults with professionals, but he also works at independent typing. So his goal is to like he doesn't use a letterboard anymore, right? He in the film, you could see he types
Yeah.
to communicate. Now somebody's holding that keyboard, right, to type because you have to hold it upright to access that different area of your brain. But he's working on putting it on a stand and typing individually, one finger at a time, one letter at a time by himself because he wants to get faster at that so he can have complete autonomy to do whatever he wants and use his own language and not have to be dependent on an aide right next to him. So there's so much hope because I know that he's kind of the leading the pack there, if you will. Like my one friend called him she said I was the Pied Piper, but I think like really he is the Pied Piper,
Mm.
right? So he's the one showing these other spellers, and when they're starting out on a letterboard and they're using three letterboards because it's hard to retrain the brain on how to do this, right?
Hmm.
Different. It's like how, Stephen Hawkins, I think he uses his eyes to communicate. And, if you're using your eyes, you have to really retrain your brain to like do this. And so it can be done. And we're finding all these ways to go faster. When I came on to this field, nobody was even using keyboards. And I'm like, oh, we've got to keep raising the bar or else these kids
Yeah.
are going to trip. And Vincent is the one that's like, raise my bar. I want to be independent. I don't want to be dependent on people next to me
Hmm.
my whole life. I want to be driving a Tesla, going on a date. I want to
Yeah.
be ordering her a glass of wine. I want to be like, spelling everything. And the fact that we can have these conversations, oh my gosh, there's just so much hope for this community. So much hope.
Mm.
But they
Yeah.
have to be healthy. I do
Yeah.
think like it's two-part, right? You don't want to just be spelling and neglect. Remember, like the three-prong approach. You
Hmm.
got to make sure these kids are healthy because some slide backwards or they don't go as fast if their bodies are struggling.
Right. Oh my gosh, we are well over time, but well
Oh,
worth
sorry.
it. If there were one final message that you would want to leave with the audience today, honey, about your work, about just everything that you've learned and seen and experienced, or just anything that you want to share, what would that be?
Well, from a work perspective, I want to say send any healthcare practitioner you can to MAPS because, I feel like that's the foundation that's really going to help these kids grow to their individual full potential, right? Each child, my dream is that every child would reach the potential that they have within them. But my personal message is there's so much hope. I mean, after being in this for 23 years, the tools we have now, they're out there. I mean, this with spellers and with maps, and there's just so much hope. There's so much we can do. And I would just hope that more people stay out of that camp where they're, sad. Like I brought my husband out of that camp and I threw him in my camp. There's stuff that we can do. So I think that
Mhm.
the one most empowering message I could ask everybody to please have is hold on to that hope. And if one thing doesn't work with your child, keep looking because there's going to be something out there and you're going to see that like glimmer of hope and you just got to hold on to it and then run with it because it's just going to keep getting better.
Wow. Well, you are definitely an earth angel. Thank you so much for spending time with my audience today. Thank you so much for your drive and the work that you've done and are continuing to do in the world.
Oh, you're such a blessing. Thanks for having me on. I'm super chatty. You should always give me like a countdown to tell me when I'm talking, but there's so much to say.
Yeah, there is. Okay, so how can my audience find out more about you, find out more about maps? Give us all the links and information.
Yeah, so maps, it's www.medmaps.org, medmaps.org. And as far as me, I'm not really anything that exciting. So I'm on LinkedIn, Honey Rinicella, but I'm starting to get more into social media. But I would suggest people follow my son. He has a blog and it's called The Unfiltered Mind of Vincent. And he talks about like how this helps, why his body's off, why it's hard to be around crowds, why he can't hug people. It's really powerful for professionals. It's really powerful for parents, but it's critical these parents read this to their autistic children. It's critical that they hear his words because those are his peers, right? So
Mhm.
I would suggest that they don't need to follow me. They could follow Maps to stay healthy, and then they could follow Vincent. So I think
Beautiful.
he's the one changing the world. I just gave him a
Oh,
path.
oh, beautifully said. Thanks.
Oh, thanks.